Well, good evening. I'm Peter Shergold, the head of the Centre for Social Impact, and I am delighted to welcome you all to this evening's Yakety Yak. Tonight's event is hosted by Stockland, a company at the forefront of meeting their commitments to sustainability, and I'm delighted to say a real partner of CSI. And the guest tonight, appropriately, is someone who has extraordinary expertise in this area. Our guest tonight is Dorjee Sun, who was an entrepreneur, who had a recruitment software company, an education company, but has increasingly become one of the world's leading social entrepreneurs. Now the CEO of Carbon Conservation. I think it was back in 2009 that Time magazine identified him as one of the environmental heroes. And to find out more, we're now going to ask Peter Thompson to come and, as always, be our interlocutor. Please welcome Dorjee Sun.
Dorjee, welcome.
Thank you, Peter. It's an honour.
This is a complicated story, and we're going to make it as simple as possible. And we thought to get it going, we'd show the promo, the shorts for a film which was recently released called The Burning Forest. You'll see that Dorjee is one of the key, most central focuses of that film, and it will give a flavour of some of the work he's done in recent years. So let's hit the button and have a look at that.
It's difficult to describe, but for me it is a little bit like a man-made tsunami.
Berikanlah jalan pada hamba-Mu ini, ya Allah.
The Earth now has a fever.
We are seeing the effects all over the world.
It requires intervention.
It started off as a quest where I'd walk out the door with my backpack, just looking for adventure.
Someone in this room came to me with a crazy idea.
One, stop climate change, and two, make money.
I'm just a little slow, so what exactly you're trying to do?
We call it carbon farming, so they're farming carbon.
What can we do in this situation that's actually going to make a difference now, this year or next year? Because forests don't have that long.
I need another coffee.
19.
Delay is no longer an option. Denial is no longer an acceptable response.
One day we'll sleep for a week. We knocked it out of the ballpark.
Dorjee got it across the line with the sign.
Enough Texas, it is so decided. This, I believe, is a turning point in history. It's a watershed moment.
It's hot in here. There's too much carbon in the atmosphere.
I feel like I'm coming down with something and it could be hope.
So there's the burning season, and it's a snapshot from your life. What were you trying to do in that time? This is leading up to the Bali meeting, which was following the Kyoto Protocol. So it was a review meeting of the Kyoto Protocol.
Yes. Wow. Can you believe how much time has passed since then? That was 2007, and it was actually a strange story. So I was invited to be on a documentary in 2006 about young leaders in Australia, and so the director at the time, Kathy Henkel, came up to me, and we were at a Christmas party. This is 2006, and she said, I'm thinking of doing this documentary about leaders. Would you be in it? And then I said, well, actually, what I'm really passionate about right now is, how can we do something about rainforests? At this time I was at an inflection point. I think it was called the quarter-life crisis, and I was searching for meaning, and And she said, well, actually, I've been commissioned to do a documentary around orangutan. And I was like, well, yeah, we were talking about the fires and the haze. And I said, actually, I thought that you could actually sell the carbon by stopping those fires and then protect the forest and create some type of asset around protecting forests. And she said, I'd like to film that if you were okay with that. And at the time, I was much younger, thinner, handsomer. I realized actually after watching that, I haven't seen that for a long time. I definitely need to get a new haircut. And, anyway, so she started filming, and the first, at that time, my step-up moment was February 2007. And I went to a UN conference. I broke into a UN conference. And then she came to Indonesia, started filming, and then the rest, I guess you'd say, is history.
And the climax of the film really is the agreement that forests would be counted as carbon repositories for the purposes of global warming and commitments to Kyoto, which was achieved at Bali. What part in that did you play?
Well, so actually, there's two streams of change, or we talk about, what are change agents. And on the one hand, you definitely have the political leaders that are inspiring change, or sometimes not inspiring change. And you've got people like, Al Gore, people really, rattling the cage. So in terms of the UN convention and those negotiations, the only parties that were able to participate were nations. But on the outskirts of that, you have NGOs, you have social entrepreneurs, you have real entrepreneurs, business people. And what we were trying to do at the time was kind of get the kitchen hot enough for there to be a cake baked, get a deal. And so through all of '07, what we were just trying to do is raise the profile of forests as real assets. And it just so happened that we had a perfect storm. We had the IPCC come out with a big report, the World Bank came with a big report, and they all said the second biggest source of carbon emissions was forest degradation, forest deforestation, and burning. And so coming into '07, this huge, I guess, boiler point, you had the Bush administration that was still vehemently against carbon and climate change. And so it was really a long shot. And somehow the nations, kind of were able to foment this deal. So there's never been a moment in my life that I felt so much hope as Christmas 2007. The nations had just said, it is hereby decided that forests will be included in carbon trading markets. And so suddenly you had this inflection point in human civilization where suddenly you could protect a forest and earn money from the forest actually creating CO2 sequestration.
What puzzles me, one of the things is, why do heads of state, presidents and prime ministers, Prime Minister of Malaysia, governors of provinces like Aceh and Papua, West Papua in Indonesia, Paul Wolfowitz, who we saw briefly in the clip there, why do they give you the time of day? What do you have to offer?
Oh man, persistence. I think that actually what it comes down to is, if you have a message that is so burningly strong, that you are prepared to kind of assuage any form of guilt or reproach or walk through what would normally be humiliating for most people, I think that they end up giving you the time of day. As you can see, Paul Wolfowitz was giving me the time of day as he was walking between meetings. No, I think that, look, how it all started, I think, was, so at this UN conference in February '07, it was like Joseph Campbell talks about the hero's quest. That was my step-up moment. So I was sitting in Sydney, and I didn't have much else to do. I'd exited a couple of businesses, and I called up the UN, and I said, hey, there's this conference in Cairns, the Hilton in Cairns. I really want to go. Can I go in? And she's like, which country do you represent? And I was like, wow, I don't really represent a country. She said, which media outlet do you represent? And I don't really represent a media. I'm just a really active and interested, social entrepreneur was not a term that I was acquainted with. So I just said, I'm the fella. I want to do it. And she said, no. This was Barbara Black, I still remember, from the UN. And at that point I was like, look, I can either not do this and not set off on this journey, or I can book a flight, book a room in the Hilton, and sit in the coffee room in the lobby and just wait for delegates to come out and then grab them. And so at that moment I just went, let's do it. So I flew up there without any plan, and I sat in the lobby. Delegates would walk out with their badges, head to the toilet. Two things I learned. One, if you meet them before they go to the toilet, it's a short conversation. And then two, if you meet them after they come out of the toilet, you want to wait till they've dried their hands. because the number of delegates that I shook with wet hands is quite disgusting.
We're getting down. We'll leave the micro detail there.
All right, sorry.
You use the term social entrepreneur. What makes what you do social entrepreneurship? What do you mean by it?
You know, actually, there's a degree of social entrepreneurship, I think, to many, many different businesses. And it's just a question of, on this spectrum, you know, where do you sit? And actually, I was mentioning this to you earlier. I'm at a bit of an inflection point, which is why I was nervous doing this interview, because I don't have, you know, the gospel truth right now. Because I'm kind of thinking through or rethinking certain parameters which I previously thought was the truth. And I guess, you know, at the time, I really wasn't that focused on money. Like, I was more focused on this social change, which was, how do you account for the global commons? How do you, the fact that Apple is worth $3 billion because of the iPad, yet the Amazon rainforest is worth nothing, even though it provides such a valuable resource to the world. It was just so inherently and intrinsically wrong for me. I just felt like it had to be rectified somehow in our economic system, you know, in our global accounting. And so for me, I mean, social entrepreneur, I guess, is just a way of saying unprofitable entrepreneur, which is what I was for those years.
Unprofitable?
Well, not very profitable, like more focused on the social outcome than just the money, but still wanting to be entrepreneurial in the sense of instigate change.
So the change is social and environmental?
Yes, and actually the ripple effects, for example, of that documentary was, that I couldn't have foreseen is, you know, I've received nearly 3,000 emails so far. I have more Facebook friends than I know, and it's all just because young people have all said, hey, you know, dear Dorjee, dear Mr. Sun, I want to be like you. I want to do something good. I want to save the forest. I want to save the orangutan. I want to do something like that. But I also want to make money, you know? And so I think that actually there are some people who are wired to want to do something good, want to do something meaningful, find meaning, but at the same time realize that pragmatically speaking, you know, Sydney ain't cheap to live in.
Well, how is that different from actually being Ergon Energy and running a wind turbine farm?
Well, you know, actually, that is still on the same spectrum. You know, it just depends on if you were to, I guess, really look at, and there's both the mens rea, actus rea, like there's both the intention and also kind of like the output. So maybe they are potentially even more of a social entrepreneur slash enterprise than maybe carbon conservation could be. But, you know, from our perspective, our pure play objective was to protect forests. So I kind of felt like, I mean, actually, this is not even me. This is more of a construct or an interpretation. So maybe we are on the same level. Maybe they're more socially responsible. I'm not sure.
Okay, we'll come back to those issues and explore them further, but I want to actually delve back into your past.
Oh, no, here we go. This is going to be painful.
Doma and Martin, your parents, are here tonight.
Hi, Mum. Hi, Dad. I'm sorry. I knew this was going to happen. I didn't tell you.
And they're migrants to Australia in the 1970s and have a very interesting story. And in a way, the fruit doesn't drop very far from the tree. So tell us about them and their coming to Australia.
Yeah, so, you know, that is an excellent reason for anything bad that I do in the future, by the way. So, I mean, my parents are, you know, probably the biggest inspiration for me. Like, you know, the voice in my head to do good, you know, is their voice. You know, I mean, I think that it's I guess you're a product of, you know, what you see and what you get taught when you grow up. And so, you know, they were born in Kalimpong, which is just around the Darjeeling area in North India. My mother's side is, you know, mixture of Tibetan and from North China, like Beijing. Grandfather was a trader. And my dad's side were Chinese acrobats and, again, a mixture. And somehow these overseas Chinese people ended up in India. And so, you know, they're more comfortable speaking Nepali.
You sped over that rather quickly, that they were acrobats.
Yes. Well, I wasn't going to do the pretzel on camera, but yes, no, that's right. What's interesting is my dad's dad and my dad's mum were in this Chinese acrobatic troupe. And so they hailed from an area in Shandong, Hebei, in those provinces. And literally from the age of 8, my dad's dad and my dad's mum were in this acrobatic troupe performing for a crust. And my granddad, was the strong man, and my nana, my grandmother, was the tightrope walker. And my dad, when he was born was I shouldn't say this. Well, he was the clown. He was like the little kid.
I can now see where you got the ability to have many balls in the air at the same time.
Well, yeah, and sometimes drop them. But no, yeah. So that's how they started. And actually, what was interesting is I was very privileged because I got a scholarship to study in Beijing University, Peking University, and at the time my granddad was going back to visit his hometown. And after the communists came to power, they got locked out of China. So he literally hadn't been back for over 50 years. He went back to the same town, the same village, the same street, the same house, and his little brother was there. And it was kind of interesting, getting to see his family, my grandfather's little brother. It was like, they were like doppelgangers, meaning he had an elder son that resembled my father, he had a younger son that resembled my uncle, and apparently his eldest son's son resembled me, but obviously did not have the opportunities that I had. So that was definitely a point when I realized my opportunities.
So the family lives on the north side of Sydney after coming to Australia?
Another refugee camp called Chatswood, yes.
Your parents are very hard workers in various businesses.
Uh-huh.
And you have a younger brother and sister.
Yes.
The younger brother, I might say, is a comedian and is headed for the Edinburgh Festival right now.
Yes, that's right. He won the Edinburgh Festival 03, Best Newcomer, 04. Yeah, he won Triple J Raw in 03. They sent him to...
This is a talented family.
Either that or, I blame the tree. It's all about the tree.
So what sort of environment were you brought up in? What did your parents value that actually had impact on you?
You don't realize it till after you get to meet a lot more people. And one of the reasons why I feel very privileged to being asked to this program is I still feel like I'm on my journey and I don't feel like I've achieved nearly as much as your other guests. But, I think that there definitely was this real motivation to work hard. It's kind of a work ethic that my parents would, whenever they had to work, they just worked. And I think that I never really appreciated the work-rest divide. So if you know what I mean, my parents would never come home, switch on the TV and not work, and they'd never have set weekends where where we'd go and not work. So for me, I think that every business that I've started, everything that I've wanted to do has been just a passion, and then I've not had an off switch, which has obviously impacted my personal life, but nevertheless, that's another topic. It's just kind of like this lack of divide. The other thing is my parents are actually probably the most environmentally friendly people that I've met just because they hate to waste. Unfortunately, that also means no heating in the winter, which is why I freeze when I come home, and no air conditioning in the summer. But, I think that it's just everything was used for a purpose, everything was redone. But actually, a lot of my influences also came from, growing up in Australia. Like we grew up in a place called Belrose, French's Forest. And at the time, we were one of only 2 Asian families in the region. And, every weekend and every day after school, summer holidays, we would literally just take out BMXs and all the kids in the cul-de-sac would go running off. And
I might say I thought Belrose, French's Forest was pretty civilised, but actually your house didn't escape being daubed with graffiti, did it?
Oh, no, yeah, this was back in the 80s. So, now that you think about it, it's 30 years ago. So it was some time ago. And at the time, obviously,
What was written on the house?
I think it was Asians go home in red, something like that, which puzzled me because the only language I spoke then was English, and yeah, it was just kids. It wasn't a big deal. I think it was just, at that time, Australia seems to go through these cyclical periods of, suddenly there's this xenophobia, let's, put out some sort of popular media statement about wanting to, make it Fortress Australia. And then everyone gets back to business and everything's cool, and then something will happen again. But I don't think it was a big deal.
Well, let's fast forward to the end of school, and you did okay. 99.95 in the New South Wales
Something
high
like
school
that. I think it was a little bit lower, but yeah.
You embarked on law and commerce.
What a mistake. No, I'm just kidding. UNSW, great university. Kind sponsors of tonight.
However, you were a poor student, I think it might be said.
Oh, man.
You didn't connect exactly.
I loved the law faculty. Hi, David Dixon. I loved the law faculty, and it was brilliant in nurturing my extracurricular activities. So I really wasn't very good at reading case law. You read pages and pages and pages of why it wasn't this and why it wasn't that, and this is the reasoning of why it wasn't that. And then you finally get to the end and you're like, that's what the answer is. So for me, I realized quite early on is that I was more of a want to get stuff done rather than theorize and be too reflective at that time.
Well, you've ultimately finished that degree, but in the meantime,
I did.
A very formative experience was actually winning a scholarship to Peking University, where you were for 2 years. So that was an inflection point, as you say.
It was. Actually, I was listening to this fantastic RSA podcast, the Royal Society of the Arts, and it talked about milestones. And so I should say this, but you know, like, I got dumped by a girl, and that's why I went to China.
Happens to all of us.
I mean, surprisingly. But so I went to China, and the day that I landed was winter time, and it was the day that Deng Xiaoping was having his funeral. Not that he knew that, but there was white buses driving through Beijing, and I'll never forget it. It was so foreign, because this is a kid that before university, I'd never really been to the, you know, eastern suburbs of Sydney. You know, like, I'd been on family holidays to Singapore and to Hong Kong.
It's a foreign country.
Well, truthfully, like, the eastern suburbs was probably more foreign than Hawaii at the time. But no, so we went to Beijing, and then that was the start of just a brain explosion. Like, I suddenly realized the unbelievable competition that Australia faced. You know, so I was at a university where you needed to get over 99.5% just to get into the university. You know, that was the competitiveness. These kids, like, they had a ticketing system where you only got enough shower tickets, this was in '97, to have a shower once every 2 days to once a week, depending on, you know, whether you're a graduate student or an undergraduate. And you kind of, like, obviously that impacted on the hygiene of the general populace, and, you know, but you kind of really appreciate just how endowed we are. And that also, for me, definitely triggered a level of zeal or activity which I did not previously have.
Well, that's interesting. That obviously was a great focusing experience for you. Well, fast forward again.
Okay.
A few years later, you finish law and commerce, and you're sort of dabbling in business to finance your life. For example, you do veggie burgers for rock concerts.
Actually, that started in the second year of university, first year of university, and, you know, I'm not even going to look over my shoulder at my dad, but he was, you know, he was pretty disapproving of the whole enterprise, because largely it was his equipment that we used, and he ended up cleaning the grill and flipping the burgers.
We'll leave those family disputes aside for the moment. But, you've got a lot to answer for, obviously. But you're good at business, and you formed serious businesses. You formed, for example, a site which law graduates could actually find work. Thousands have actually signed up that way.
Yeah, no, it's still running today. You know, and I'm very proud of every business that I've kind of been involved in.
Tell us about Asia Groove, for example.
Oh my gosh. Oh, okay. Okay, I will. But that was, okay, so first of all, Peter, first of all, I will say that business is easy. You know, I think that people overcomplicate things. Really, all you need to do is figure out something that people want, sell it to them, and then deliver it at a price that is lower than the actual cost that you sell it at. So the first business we embarked on was this veggie burger thing. We went to the big day out. All of my friends would love going to these huge concerts, and many of them were vegetarians. And you know, the only food that you could get as a vegetarian then were French fries. You know, and then other than that, there was precious little. So one year we just started making these veggie burgers. One day we made $10,000. You know, 6 of us. We sold 2,000 burgers, and you know, it was kind of like the electrifying experience of doing something that people enjoyed that made me feel that business actually was a conduit to change. Like, you'd see lines of these vegetarians or people who didn't want to eat all the other terrible food that is on offer there, just, you know, queuing up for, you know, something that you were making that was so inspiring.
Well, just briefly about Asia Groove, just
okay.
That.
All right, so Asia Groove, I was trying to avoid that, I was trying to divert. So my first business, serious business, was, there was 3 guys and myself, and we got together, we started a company called CV Mail. And CV Mail is still used today by many of the law firms, and it was this recruitment software. And at the time I was a co-president at the University of New South Wales Law School, Law Society, and all of the law firms, they said, look, we're going to go online and we need some type of recruitment software. Would you guys be able to be involved in that process? And so, you know, Monster.com came in, and you know, they did a big presentation. All the law HR directors were there, and you know, we're the biggest in the world. And then Seek.com came in, and you know, we're the biggest in Australia. And then we stood up and we gave a presentation, just saying, you know, we're law students. We understand law students. We understand law. You know, this is what we do. And we ended up winning that bid. And the first year we had nearly $1 million in revenues, and then we just kept growing. We had a London office, Melbourne office, and that was when you kind of I was 23 at the time, just out of law school, and you're like, wow, this business isn't that hard, you can get started. But then there was a strategic divergence. So I saw all of these kids signing up with these profiles, their resumes essentially. Because in the past you'd have to send out literally 30 resumes to all the law firms. We automated that onto the website. And then you realize that actually, after seeing all these amazing resumes, what differentiated people from people were just the friends that they had. And so this was in, 03, before Facebook and all of that stuff. And I was thinking, I'd really love to do a business where these profiles became alive, and this was when blogging sites started exploding, social media started exploding. So I got involved in a company, asiagroove.com, and it grew to about 50,000 Asian Australians. It was the biggest Asian Australian website in Australia. And it was really funny though what was their common interest binding them. These are kids, and so there were cars and fashion and all of that type of stuff. We started making money from virtual gold coins. They would SMS in 199 honey, and they'd get these honey gold coins. And we were making thousands and thousands of dollars every week just from selling these gold coins. And I was like, wow, it's a brave new world out there. Anyway.
Okay, well, you sold these businesses. What motivated you to do that?
I woke up and I was like, well, actually, there's a few things. One was I just felt like what I was doing was very easy. I was doing great. But it didn't feel like I was scratching a part of I had an itch that I couldn't scratch. It was like something was missing, waking up every day or every night and watching websites is good, but it didn't feel like I was really challenging myself.
We're almost sort of transited to the present because as a result of selling those businesses, you're cashed up, you go traveling, and that actually starts to make you focus on forests.
Yeah. Well, actually, I'd always been, I think every Australian, because you grow up fairly close to the bush and to the beach, you want to do something good for the environment. And I started seeing these documentaries and footage about, some of the just obscene destruction that's occurring. Like human beings with our control of machines and, our ability to, effectively wreak havoc over our ecosystems, it was becoming really poignant. And actually, one of the moments that crystallized was when Steve Irwin passed, and at the time I'd been discussing with Wildlife Warriors, his charity, and had met with Terry and those guys. For me at that point, I was just like, wow, if such an amazing hero of the environment has died and passed, who's going to fill his job? And not saying that I was interested in getting bitten by snakes or anything, but I just realized that young people who have law degrees, who have education, who have finances, if we are going to work the traditional path, which is get a job, make money, and then do philanthropy, it's too late. And on top of that, you're not really actually devoting what you really can devote, which is your brain power, your bandwidth, your energy, your vigor. Money is money. Checkbook charity is one thing. But I finally got to a point where I was like, wow. I remember I was lying in bed, I couldn't sleep, I'm a bit of an insomniac, and I was just like, if it's not going to be me to do something, who's it going to be? And I couldn't think of anyone who would do it other than me.
Well, you have, and we talked about that in brief in relation.
Still work in progress.
In relation to barley and cans and the like. The trading world, the carbon trading world is here. So what opportunities does it?
Yeah, so carbon trading is fascinating because effectively, our first deal, our first project was with Rio Tinto, actually. And, they bought carbon credits in Queensland, Australia. And then, we kind of got to a point now where, and this is the inflection point in my career, we're starting to work with big business in the sense that what started off as a very idealistic ideologue, what we were trying to do was protect forests, has now become like a 2.0 conservation, like pragmatic conservation, which is the only way you're going to get real conservation is by embedding it into business. So we work with paper and pulp, we work with mining, we're starting to work with palm oil plantations, just to get them towards sustainability.
When you say we, who are you talking about?
Carbon Conservation, the company.
So tell us about carbon conservation.
Well, so what started off as, kind of like just a vehicle to do this forest protection, we were so let down. So what this movie doesn't show is the global financial, well, it does show a little bit, but the global financial crisis crippled carbon trading. The lack of action, like the lack of ability for the Rudd administration, the Obama administration, the fact that the pigs, like Portugal, Italy, Spain, have all kind of fallen apart, Greece. The fact that Japan has been hit by this tsunami, Canada, conservative government doesn't want to do carbon trading. Basically, carbon pretty much wound down. And then what happened was we had to start working with, carbon conservation had to start working with, bigger companies, APP Paper and Pulp, we're doing a project with them.
It's Asia Pulp and Paper, right?
Yes, that's right. And, we're working with these companies now to help them become more pragmatically both carbon neutral, but also environmentally and sustainably conservationists, in order to kind of, you have to use business as a weapon rather than, think that it's the enemy. So it's how do we now start redirecting business towards a more sustainable route?
Do you lose sight of, or do you run the risk of losing sight of your social and environmental goals when you do that?
That's right. Yeah, I mean, this is my inflection point. Absolutely. And we always have to, we always feel that we're doing the right thing. Because ultimately, even if, there are some, like for example, NGOs have the luxury, and coming back to the question of change, there are some change agents whose jobs, are to protest and campaign. But then that's kind of like the stick. Whereas what we want to do is provide the carrot, which is if we engage these companies and we show them and work with them and work towards sustainable goals, then actually what we're doing is we're walking this path. So just as a really quick example, we're working with APP on a sustainability roadmap to 2020. And the reason for that is just because, businesses, if they don't have the right guidance or leadership, don't really have the, the experience or the expertise. But, hopefully by 2020, we can actually help make a change in a company that is, largely attacked. And so it's kind of like when you walk this path, it's every day you're always having to just make sure that you stay true to the purposes and the goals that you're trying to drive towards. Like for me, if we don't find a way to value global commons, whether you want to call that forests or sustainable fisheries or climate, sustainable balanced climate, stable climate, I just think that we as a civilization, like the earth will continue to roll on. It'll just keep turning. But we as a civilization will go to the dark ages.
Dorjee Sun, thank you very much.
Wow, on that note, so negative. Okay, thank you.